This is a story about a fox. A fox who was bold. A fox who was brave. A fox who faced man, his machines, and his cities. A fox who braved the weather, the winters, and the unforgiving cruelty of nature. This is a story of the lone red fox. Plucky woke gradually, as he could hear the cawing of a bird from some distance away. He felt the absolute definition of terrible, but was at least well rested. He managed to force his eyes to open, and gazed across the open field on its side. His vision was blurry at first, but after blinking several times, it eventually cleared. The sun was high in the sky. Clearly it was late morning, approaching midday. He raised his head from the ground, lifting a wary front leg to position himself to sit up. He immediately fell when his leg buckled, considering he used his injured left one. Plucky lay a moment longer with heavy breathing, before he could will himself to rise again. He forced his ears to twitch around to listen, and started to hear the faint rumble of an engine and... Was the ground shaking? This time Plucky rose from the ground in a hurry and looked behind him. A strange vehicle with 2 small and 2 large wheels approached slowly as it towed something behind it. Suddenly, Plucky had loads of energy and leapt out of the vehicle's way as it rumbled slowly past. He shuddered the thought away that if he hadn't waked when he did, it would have run him over. Clearly the human who drove the thing hadn't seen him in the grass. He'd have to thank the bird that had woken him up from his slumber if he ever met it. He recognized the vehicle to be a tractor, pulling some strange machinery behind it. Unknown to the fox, it was a plow. He was on farmland, and the plowing season had arrived, and all the local farmers, including this one, took to their tractors to churn the soil and plant seeds for the new year's crops. Plucky slowly wandered to the edge of the field. His prolonged slumber had rested his weary figure, but he still didn't feel at his best. His eye was still irritated and was watering, though a lot less than before. The newly opened scar on his leg had stopped bleeding, but his leg was very stiff. He could barely bend it without causing some pain, and it ached constantly. He winced whenever he put weight on it, so tried not to. It did mean limping occasionally, but he just endured it. There was no point to moaning, for who would hear him? He then looked behind at his tail to examine the point where the car had hit it. There was no noticeable kink in it, but he thought possibly the bone was broken as it was causing some anguish. He was thankful, though. If he was to break a bone in any of his appendages, he would rather it be his brush than one of his legs. After wandering to the edge of the field, he came across a small puddle of water. Plucky then remembered how thirsty he was, and proceeded to quench it. Unknown to him, some of the electricity that he had conducted from the electric fence the previous day had yet to discharge, and as his tongue barely touched the water, it did. Water conducts electricity, it's a lesson that Pokemon has taught me. It shocked his tongue as the electricity passed into the water, and he fell backwards in shock, releasing a loud yelp. His tongue went momentarily numb and hung freely from his mouth as he panted, his head hanging down. Plucky suddenly grew a strong, unfathomable hatred for man and his technology. Filled with rage, he splashed his front paws into the puddle repeatedly as he growled loudly to himself. His sworn enemy at the time was obviously Caesar and the Grey Foxes, but they had not harmed him as of yet. The only misfortunes he had suffered were from man. It was man that had taken him far from home. It was a man who had shot him. Man had given him these scars, man had broken the tip of his tail, and man's electrified fence that had tortured him despite it being his decision to pass through it. Plucky then stopped, having finished venting his rage on the puddle. It soon calmed, and the ripples disappeared, and Plucky stared extensively at his own reflection. It had been a long time since the last he had... Plucky barely recognized himself. His face looked troubled, and his fur was no longer smooth and clean like it once was. It was ruffled and dirty. The nick in his left ear was prominent enough. He hadn't noticed this considering they were on the back of his head. 2 scars streaked across the left of his face. The one on his cheek had faded, but the one across his eye was black with dried blood. He hadn't noticed his left eye was only half open. The scars made him look old and angry. He didn't like this. Plucky was barely 2 years old, and the only reason he could accept why he looked the way he did was because of the way he currently felt. He then stared into his own eyes. They were no longer bright and naive. They were almost dull and lifeless, and they clearly showed his suffering. He turned also to look at his figure. He still looked like the stout, plucky fox he had always been. But he was shaking. Clearly he was weak, and currently malnourished, and his form showed it. His tail was also lifeless. It dangled behind him straight and barely moved, which too mimicked the way he was feeling. What had this journey done to him? None of the others looked as badly as he did, or at least he didn't notice it. Another thought crossed his mind. If he looked this bad, what also did Scarlet see in him? He thought about her. She was a perfect specimen of a vixen. Her lithe form, sleek and fit, her legs dainty, and her brush graceful. Her amber eyes twinkled with beauty, and her fur, like her namesake, a bright shining scarlet. But of course he would see her like that. He was in love with her. His stomach then growled at him, bringing Plucky back to his senses and away from his thoughts. He was so hungry. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. And he felt it. The pit inside his stomach felt like it could have been bottomless. He may have been well rested, but he felt weak. So very weak. Plucky decided to move on, but not before taking a drink from the puddle. He cautiously sniffed the water as he hadn't known what had numbed his tongue, only that it had. Fortunately now, the electricity had fully discharged, and when he warily lapped the water with his tongue, the only sensation he felt was a cool, refreshing liquid pass down his throat. He was there for a while, and almost drank the entire puddle. Finally, he had quenched his thirst. Now it was time to satisfy his hunger. This chapter, and the chapter before, clearly shows that Plucky is no longer the fox that we saw at the beginning of the story. Yes, he's still brave and bold, and he still obviously cares about everyone because he's worried about his friends and Scarlet and wants to see them again. But the way that the chapter just describes his eyes, the way to his injuries, the way he felt on the inside, his absolute hatred for humanity, for what they did to him. This journey has completely changed him. On the inside, he's different. On the outside, he still looks the part of the happy young fox that he was before everything that happened, before he met Vixen, before the Grey Foxes, before he decided to leave. The young, naive fox that we saw at the beginning of the story is gone. His innocence has been cruelly ripped away from him. This is a story about how Plucky is forced to confront reality and grow up, becoming someone, a creature, a fox, human-like, that's a shell of the youthful self that he was at the start. 14 Sleepyhead09, I wish I could say this more, but just like Finn Monster, you should write a book, a real-life book in real life, because you are a talented writer. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Because anyone who does, they're fucking liars. After traveling some distance and some time, Plucky found himself in another field. He was being ignorant of the daylight on purpose. He wasn't going to let man dictate his actions any longer, and he roamed across the land boldly and freely. He had even walked cleanly past several humans to assert that he wouldn't be controlled. They just watched the fox pass by in bewilderment. Of course, Plucky made sure they were unarmed first. He wanted to force his own dominance of the land, but not at the risk of getting shot again. Plucky sniffed the air attentively. He had followed his nose here for the last few miles. The scent was potent. The scent of 1,000 pheasants. Although more than likely that was an exaggeration, Plucky knew they were obviously plentiful. The field he was in also had a lingering smell about it, something he recognized too. Gunpowder. Life, will you please stop piling all this shit onto Plucky, for God's sake? He has almost died in the last chapter, and now you have him walk onto a pheasant shoot! God! God, please just give him a break. That's all I want, please. My heart can't take any more of this. Okay. I'm sorry, I almost broke down there. He was also enticed by a small metal cylinder on the ground that shone in the daylight. He sniffed it eagerly. It too smelled slightly of gunpowder. It was a brass bullet casing, ejected from a firearm, though some time ago. Plucky was on game land, and upon realizing it, he decided to stop being ignorant and tread carefully. Fortunately, the bird shooting season had already passed the previous autumn and winter, but the gamekeeper wouldn't hesitate to shoot a fox that could potentially kill off any of the game birds' new roosts for the spring. Plucky knew about this danger all too well. It was the way his father had been felled by the humans. We're going to bring back Bold into this. I'm confessing now, I've read ahead a bit in the story, and there's a bit of an emotional moment where Plucky has to confront the fact that he just doesn't have a father, which is in chapter 20, The Son Without a Father. And I'm going to be uploading the Whisper side story after that, so emotional gut punch, everybody. Prepare for it, because it's coming at us. Just roll on with the punches. Just compromise whenever we can to keep moving forward. Pain will not destroy us. I am getting off track. I'm not stretching this chapter out any longer than it needs to be. However, this didn't deter him, especially not when he caught the glimpse of a lone pheasant through the long grass. Finally, something to eat. Plucky stalked up to it, deathly silent, and crouched low to the ground. This inadvertently caused some struggle to his injured front leg, but all he needed were his hind legs to pounce. His mouth watered preparedly as he advanced on it. His stomach growled quietly in anticipation. The pheasant was plump and fat, which only made Plucky give in to his instinct and want it more and more as he continued to stalk it. The bird was completely oblivious of its hunter, until it was all too late. The fox pounced and instantly clamped its neck with its jaws. An easy kill. Wow, he's gotten so much better at hunting! And all this despite still being injured! Wow! Our boy has definitely grown up. Plucky was surprised when several of other pheasants flew away from the surrounding area. A couple scurried around, foolishly but unknowingly towards the fox, towards their certain death. The fox instinctively caught those two as well. Plucky briefly celebrated his catch and immediately devoured one of the pheasants vigorously. By hunting the game birds, he knew and loved the fact he had, to put it in man's terms, stuck a middle finger up to them, whatever that expression meant. It basically means flipping the bird. And I just did that in real life, thank you. But luckily I'm recording this in my room, so I'm not flipping it off at anyone. I'm not flipping anyone off. However, he wanted more justice for his injuries. He was just one creature of many trying to live their life. Plucky lifted his head up high through the grass and could see in the distance a single cottage. Obviously the gamekeeper's. A snide smile crossed his muzzle and he had an idea. He clasped his jaws around his other 2 dead pheasants and strolled cautiously towards the cottage. When it was clearer, he picked up a new smell. A very potent smell. The rancid odor of rotting flesh. Plucky soon discovered what it was, and he dropped his catch from his mouth as it fell open in horror. A line of at least a dozen dead foxes, red, blue, and gray alike, and amongst them other assorted carnivores, including some badgers, weasels, and stoats. Holy shit! There was a distinctive bloody hole in every one of them, a hole from a single bullet. The carcasses swung in the breeze, hanging from their tails along a wire line propped up by 2 wood posts, an obvious warning to any creature that would dare hunt the precious game birds. Plucky had second thoughts about his idea as he stared at the bloody gibbet, but he examined the house with care. There was no movement around and nothing stirred. He went on and stopped again, this time in clear view of the cottage, and while he watched it vigilantly, he devoured the last 2 pheasants, an act of pure defiance of man's will in this area. Once he had finished, he finally felt better, now full of energy. If not, he may have been too full. 3 fat pheasants? That was enough for a few days. As well as that, Plucky was too excited by his own defiance of man, and suddenly decided to do something very reckless. He picked up several rib bones of the eaten pheasants and sauntered over to the cottage, leaving the rest of the remains to be discovered later by the gamekeeper. Though if he was successful in this irresponsible act, they would be discovered much sooner. He approached the cottage and still nothing stirred. Then he did it. He flicked his head in the way that the rib bones flew from his mouth. A couple hit the wall and fell, but one smashed straight through the thin pane of glass which formed the cottage window, making a loud crash. Instantly after, Plucky heard a loud yet muffled shout from the inside of the house, and he darted to safety behind a cobbled stone wall the far side. Plucky watched eagerly, still a snide smile on his face, but now also of triumph and arrogance. He had his result. The door of the cottage abruptly swung open, and a human rushed out, weapon in hand. He scanned around but saw nothing, but the fox could hear him cursing loudly. Plucky was fully content. He had no quarrel with this particular human, but it was deserved, considering all the poor creatures that had been killed just trying to get a meal. Plucky didn't care that he had angered this human, and he didn't care what consequences there were. He didn't plan on staying here. He had fed well and drank much, and achieved some justice and vengeance. Now, though, only one goal was on his mind. Now it was time to find his friends and his beloved mate. The power of friendship and the power of love will bring you home. Plucky sauntered on through the countryside. After a lengthy sleep the night before, and now after a substantial meal and drink, he was full of energy and traveled on through the night. Eventually he found a safe place to sleep, in amongst the undergrowth at the edge of another farm field. Curled up, head to toe, he drifted off to sleep. During the night, though, it was cold. Very cold. A thin layer of frost covered the landscape. He was so used to sleeping in the company of his friends, and most recently, for the last month and longer, he and Scarlet had slept in a warming embrace. It was this night he began to feel lonely. He had been alone in his life before, on more than one occasion, but tonight was when he felt his loneliness. He also missed the warmth of his mate. Scarlet's body was like a shimmering warm fire next to him. He missed her and his friends, but naturally he missed Scarlet the most. He went to sleep in a pit of depression that night. Poor Plucky. He doesn't deserve this shit. The following week passed by quickly. Plucky's sleeping pattern was all messed up. A fox would usually sleep during the day and be active at night, but Plucky was active whenever the mood took him. His luck was fading too. Catching live prey became a bit more challenging ever since he had made his presence known around the local farmland, woodland, and wild grassland. He was also completely lost and had no idea of where he was. Which way was White Deer Park? And more importantly to him, which way were his friends and mate? At one point he passed a rabbit burrow, all of which darted for the bolt hole of their warren when they caught the remotest glimpse of the fox. Plucky could easily dig them out. He was hungry enough to do it. No! He had made an oath unto himself to never hunt rabbits or hares, whether he knew them or not. What would Dash think of that? Plucky had already asked her that question. Of course, it quite disconcerted her, but she answered positively that the natural order of nature could not be changed. As long as, of course, Plucky never hurt her, which she knew he never would. It was after then Plucky sworn he would never hunt rabbits or hares. He felt it would be a betrayal to his best friend. What if by accident in an instinctive hunting frenzy he had killed her and realized too late? The reason for this personal oath came to Plucky in his youth, where, quite distressfully, Plucky had experienced a dream, or by a better description, a nightmare, when he had done just that, where Dash's bloody corpse hung from his own jaws. To this date, that was the single most mental pain Plucky had ever suffered in his life. It was an all too possible mistake he would not let happen, so it ended it prematurely with his own oath. Plucky then came back to reality after letting his mind wander. Not that he had any intention to catch them. The rabbits would be at the deepest point of safety in their warren now. So onward he went, and let the rabbits be, once again continuing to suffer through hunger.
Oh my god! I'm trying my best. I'm really trying my best. But this chapter is just too emotional. What has Plucky ever done to be alone like this? You guys are with me, right? You guys understand? I'm gonna break. I'm gonna really break because of this one chapter.
Soon, Plucky came across a small pond, and after taking a drink, once again he looked at his reflection. Evidently, the fox that had stared back at him the week before, when he still felt his absolute worst, was but a mere fake image. Now his eyes were bright and full of wonder, yet had a hint of hopelessness to them. The blood had dried from his reopened scars and had started to scab away. His figure looked fitter, stronger, and healthier than before, and his bushy tail? Freely it swished and thrashed behind him. This renewed his confidence considerably, which became a good advantage later that day.
Oh, Plucky's getting better, guys. I'm actually feeling happy again. He's feeling happy again, but I'm sure he'll make his way back to his friends and mate. He will. He will.
As Plucky strolled along the edge of some woodland, he heard a bird screech. He looked up eagerly, hoping it would be his good falcon friend. Perry the peregrine. It wasn't.
Aww.
Another bird of prey perched on a branch above him and was looking at him, screeching wildly. Plucky didn't know this particular species of bird, but was clearly a bird of prey, as it had a hooked beak and razor-sharp talons that dug into the wood. Plucky stared at it for a while. Yes, it was definitely screaming at him. Though Plucky had done nothing to upset this bird, so he rolled his eyes, looked away, and continued to walk on.
Oi! Fox! I'm talking to you!
An aggressive female voice suddenly spurted from the goshawk. A goshawk? No. You're screeching at me. and I'm ignoring it, Plucky answered bitterly.
Don't just think you can walk freely around here. I own this land,
the goshawk replied ruthlessly, her voice powerful and unfaltering, but Plucky stood his ground. No, you don't. The humans own it. You and I are merely creatures that live upon it, Plucky stated. He said it reluctantly. Though it was true, as angry as he was at the humans, they did own the land and no creature had a claim on it.
Nevertheless, the humans may own the land, but I rule it, the goshawk continued harshly. I have driven off many other predators, and you shall be no different.
You needn't concern yourself with me. I don't intend to linger.
You cross my territory ignorantly. That's enough to make us enemies.
This is just pathetic. I've done nothing to insult you. I walk along the ground as is my right, just as yours is to fly above it, Plucky said defiantly, and soon turned to leave. Now leave me alone. I am in no mood for games.
Hey, come back here,
the goshawk commanded, as she flew down to the ground and stood decisively in front of the fox, a daring action for a bird. Perhaps you misunderstood me. I said, I am in no mood for games, Plucky said spitefully, and then threatened. Now fly away before you get hurt.
That's supposed to be a threat. Ha! I'm not afraid of you.
The bird laughed carelessly at Plucky as he walked past. Suddenly, Plucky went feral. He wasn't merely going to let this bird talk to him like this. He snarled, turned, and pounced on the bird as quick as a bolt of lightning. It happened so fast the goshawk had no chance. Plucky had pinned the female bird on its front. His paws leant hard on her wings, and his jaws clamped, though lightly around the back of its neck.
I told you I am in no mood for games!
Plucky growled maliciously. I am tired. I am hungry. And I am trying to find my friends. Now give me one good reason why I shouldn't satisfy my hunger right now.
No! Let me go! Please!
The goshawk pleaded. Her previous aggressive mood had completely subsided into a submissive plea. That's not a reason.
My species is endangered around here! You can't kill me! Please!
The bird pleaded again. Very well, I won't. But being in danger doesn't give you the right to be a bully. Plucky scowled and then let the bird go. The goshawk stood up and ruffled her feathers from the grapple, now terrified of the fox. She stared petrified until Plucky spoke again, this time less aggressively. Now I suggest you now make yourself scarce, lest any other, less merciful creature finds out you're really a coward. The goshawk said nothing, only nodding quickly and then flew off into the distance, having learnt its lesson. Plucky watched it disappear until the speck of the bird could no longer be seen. He was rather pleased with himself. The fox went to continue his travels. But suddenly another branch of a tree ruffled and another bird called, making several very distinctive caws.
Caw! Caw! Now there is another bold young fox if ever I did see one.
The bird called out to the plucky red fox. Plucky looked up to see the creature was a crow. Its coal-black feathers stood out in amongst the regrowing canopy of the trees. Plucky soon replied, Of course, I'm flattered.
I should also fully express my gratitude towards you too, the crow continued.
Gratitude? What for?
For ridding this area of that terrible goshawk.
The crow announced almost irritably.
Arrogant bird has been terrorizing all the creatures round here. Many have fled in hopes of escape.
I see. Well, you're very welcome, Plucky granted the bird's thankfulness. But I must be moving on. Plucky then turned to leave, thinking the conversation was over. However, the crow intended to quiz the fox further.
Where might you be heading? The bird asked.
That's for me to know, Plucky responded abruptly.
I can help you, you know. I've been watching you eagerly for the past week.
Yeah, because last chapter, the crow saw Plucky when he collapsed. Like I believe you would help me, Plucky huffed. I know what you are. You're a carrion crow. You were probably just waiting for me to die so you could rip the flesh from my bones.
I shall not deny it. It was on my mind.
The crow stated innocently before admitting.
But you should thank your lucky stars I came along. It was I who woke you from being run over by that tractor, do you remember?
Crow from Animals of Farthing Wood, Season 2. Crow was the best friend of Bold. I read about it online, and I watched some episodes of Season 2 where he met Bold. I hope you like my singing voice, because the excitement in my singing voice is apparent, cause this crow is now helping the son of Bold. Plucky! Oh, come on, you can't deny that you needed some levity from all the shitstorm that we've been going through. And I'm really sorry for all the swearing. I promise I'll stop for the rest of the story. Okay? Okay. That was you? Plucky turned back. Yes, I remember. Thanks. But I would have woken up on my own accord.
Too late, probably,
the crow stated cynically. Pfft. I was fine, Plucky huffed again, this time arrogantly.
No, you weren't. Clearly you were weak and weary, but I kept watching you, and now you've obviously returned to a peak condition, the crow observed.
You knew I was well alive, yet you continue to examine me. What kind of crow are you?
One that has seen this all before,
the bird said forlornly, hanging his head down for a moment. He soon left it and continued more positively.
I also found your defiance of the gamekeeper rather entertaining. Yet you realize how careless it was, right?
Of course I did. I'm not an imbecile, Plucky snapped.
Then why do something so reckless?
The crow snapped back. It was revenge. Man has caused me pain and suffering, so I damaged his home and feasted on his precious pheasants, Plucky exclaimed boldly and aggressively.
You've suffered from the hands of man?
Plucky then turned on the spot and revealed the other side of his figure. The side that featured his clearly evident scars that the crow had yet to notice. He said scornfully, "What do you think?"
I see,
the crow replied with a hint of guilt as he saw the scarred side of the fox.
You remind me very much of another young fox I used to know.
Really? How very interesting, Plucky said sarcastically as he turned to walk away. No, Plucky, this is important. This is really important. This is important. You see, this is important. Come on, listen to him.
Yes,
the crow announced, ignoring Plucky's sarcasm.
Bold, his name was.
Wait. Plucky stopped dead in his tracks. Sorry if you hear that, I was just at the fish tank, looking at the fish. Did he hear what he thought he heard? He turned back and asked, "Did you say Bold?"
Yes. Did you know him? You remind me so much of him.
I suppose I would. He was my father.
Goodness! You're Bold and Whisper's son?
The crow exclaimed with surprise as he bobbed up and down on his perch with excitement.
You know my mother too?
Plucky also asked in surprise.
Yes, they're old friends of mine.
Wait, I know who you are. You're Rubber, the carrion crow, Plucky exclaimed, now realizing who his fellow conserver was. He had learned of the crow's existence by stories told by his mother of his father's adventures. Oh, they're actually using the book name, like Robber. Awesome.
The TV show just called him Crow, but here they're calling him Robber, like in the book. Yes, that was the name Bold gave me, considering the way I, well, steal food. It really is a small world. Plucky murmured to himself, out of earshot of the bird. No, Plucky, don't make me sing that song. What should I call you? The crow suddenly asked. Plucky, the fox replied proudly. Fitting name for you, I'm sure. Robert cackled, but abruptly stopped. But ultimately, I think your recent actions completely disrespect your father's memory. Excuse me? You've been gallivanting off in defiance of man. A stupid, stupid creature you are. Robert scolded the young fox. Why are you being so harsh? Plucky asked nervously. Robert ignored him and continued to reprimand the young fox. Your father was a beloved friend of mine. He gave his own life to be sure you, his offspring, could live their life in a safe place, far from the many dangers he himself had suffered. And you've abandoned that? For what possible reason? I understand. I hadn't thought of it. Plucky stuttered in a state of grief. Robert was right. He had been most irresponsible, not just recently, but ever since he had left the nature reserve, and even at times when he still resided in it. Though he understood Robert had obviously grieved for his father, the crow clearly didn't understand his emotions about it. But it's hard to preserve the memory of someone you never knew, no matter how much he meant to me. Robert too then realized. Plucky never knew his father. He soon spoke his own thoughts. I suppose I never really saw it like that. I apologize. As do I. I'm sorry. I guess, though, considering your recklessness and how very bold you are, you really are your father's son, Robert stated with a forlorn smile. So it would seem, Plucky returned a forlorn smile. They stayed quiet for a while, the only real connection between the two creatures being one individual long gone. It had been nearly 2 years since Bold had died, and it was something which made it fairly awkward between them. Robert soon broke the silence. So why did you leave the nature reserve? Multiple reasons really, but one was more prominent than the rest, Plucky began. Let me guess. A vixen is involved. Robert interrupted with a playful smile. Gold star. All the gold stars for Robert. Yes. Is she already your mate? Of course you know what time of year it is. Robert chuckled mischievously. Yes, she is my mate, and I'm well aware of it, Plucky replied, knowing exactly what the crow was referring to. Currently it was mating season for foxes. I suppose you aren't alone by choice, then? Robert pried further. No. It's a long story, and I've been separated from her and the rest of my friends. Actually, I don't suppose you could help me? Of course. Anything for the son of Bold and Whisper. Pardon me, Robert beamed. Have you seen my friends? Plucky asked. Depends. I'm assuming I'm looking for a group of foxes. No, just the one. A vixen, 2 hares, 2 squirrels, and a peregrine falcon, Plucky explained. A peculiar set of animals. You definitely live up to your lineage. A true Farthing Wood creature, Robert smiled. It's how I grew up, and it's how I lived my life. But have you seen them? I do recall seeing such a group of animals, but naturally I thought nothing of it. Where were they? Plucky exclaimed excitedly. His head lifted high and ears perked up, his tail too thrashed side to side eagerly upon hearing the news. Scarlet and his friends were safe. Edge of the local town, not too far from here. But of course I speak in terms of how the crow flies. Literally, Robert explained. It may be a couple of days' travel for you. That's not a problem. Can you lead me there? Plucky said eagerly. Of course, but you should only travel at night. Human presence is thick in these parts. Whether they intend to harm you or not, I suggest you avoid them, the crow warned. I agree, but you're only active in the day. How am I to follow? I'll point you in the right direction and come find you when morning breaks. All right then, seems a reasonable setup. I shall also assist you in feeding yourself. No, I can't ask you to do that. Plucky dismissed this. He was perfectly able to find his own food. I insist, it's no trouble. Otherwise you'll spend too much of the night finding food for yourself. All right then, Plucky conceded, knowing the crow's logic was sound and his opinion unchangeable. Thank you, Robber. No need to thank him. Thank your lucky stars, Plucky. Just like Bold. Just like father and son. You're very welcome, Plucky, Robber beamed at him. I suggest you get a quick nap somewhere safe. It'll be dark soon, and we shall begin as soon as you're ready. Robber then flew off and left Plucky to rest. As he did to go scavenging for food, he couldn't help but mutter to himself cheerily, Bold son! Unbelievable! As dusk came that day, Robber returned to where Plucky was sleeping, and left him a morsel of meat for the fox to snack on before his journey. The crow nudged him awake, and Plucky woke with a long yawn and soon took the food. Robber pointed Plucky in the direction of the town, just like he had for his father before him, and Plucky set off. Now it was Robber's turn to rest. Plucky went swiftly and enthusiastically through the night in great leaps and bounds, certain that with the grateful help of an old friend of the family, he would soon see his friends and adored mate very soon. Even in the darkest tunnel, there's a light that always shines through. And at the end of that tunnel, the rainbow of hope will shine again. Just a quick note to say, for those who don't know, Robber is the name of Crow in the book The Fox Cub Bold. The Fox Cub Bold, the Lone Red Fox, the Bold Red Fox. That should be a fusion of both titles. I'll think about that. I feel absolutely better now. Plucky's alive. He's on his way back to his mate and friends. There's a town that they're hopefully going to be reuniting in, and just as a bonus, as an extraordinary bit of luck, Plucky's found the best friend of his father, which means that now he isn't alone anymore. It's Plucky and Robert together, heading to town. So, I hope to see you all again in the next video, and until then, I'm the Masked Ranger saying keep moving forward, remember the oath, never give up no matter what happens, and thank your lucky stars! Bye everybody!